Hello, Charles, and welcome to the Mikobits show. Nice to have you.
Miko, so good to see you again. It's been a long time.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, one of the things I've been reading about that, really fascinated by is you recently went on a fairly extended meditation retreat. So, that was super interesting. So, I'd love to have you dip into there.
Yeah, so for about the last 8 years, I've been off and on meditating, and it's one of those things I just really haven't done enough of. And so I started talking to a bunch of different people, and they said, "Look, it doesn't really matter the path that you choose. There's like yoga stuff you can do, and there's Zen Buddhism, and John Kabat-Zinn created mindfulness, this mindfulness practice like MBSR. Pick something, commit to it, and go do a mega dose to get started. Do a whole week retreat minimum. In this case, it was a silent retreat, and just go to the middle of damn nowhere and get it done. And then after you've done that, it's really gonna be transformative, and it's the foundation upon which you can build a proper meditation practice." So I said, all right, fine. So I kind of played the calendar game, and I found a week where, as we get closer to Christmas, things are kind of dying down a little bit. I felt it was really appropriate this particular week. So I went up to the Shambhala Mountain Center, which is one of the nice meditation retreat centers. It's out in Colorado, in the mountains of Colorado, Red Feather Lakes. And I spent an entire week, and it was 7 a.m. to 8:30 at night, and you just sit hour after hour after hour, meditate. And when you're not meditating, you're doing yoga. You're trying to be mindful there. And then we also did a lot of walking meditation, aimless wandering, peaceful abidance. We learned an enormous amount. And it was a silent retreat, so basically you couldn't talk after day two. And that means like no talking. Not like, hey, you can't talk during the meditation. No talking at all, even when you're in your room with your friends, whatever. And also modest eyes, so you can't look at each other. So it kind of felt like being in a prison camp, right? Like no looking, no talking, eyes down, waking up very early, going to bed very night, a lot of pain. And actually, I always like upping the ante a little bit. So I got up around 5-ish every morning, and we went outside and meditated in the snow in our gym clothing. And actually last day I did it shirtless. So, it was in the mountains in the winter. So like wind is blowing and there's tons of snow, and oh God, it was horrible. And then 3 days in, I stopped eating. So I did a 4-day fast on top of that. So I didn't eat for 4 days. We did the ice meditation. There was no talking. So it's a very ascetic existence. And I wrote a blog post where I kind of walked through my experiences and how it kind of went through stages, where for the first few days, my mind was like a swarm of locusts. And I said, all right, I need to calm this down and quiet this down. So it was really mindfulness stuff. And then after about day 3, 4, it started calming to a point where I could get beneath the swarm, deeper into the ocean. I said, finally, peace. And then I said, oh, well, there's all these horrible demons that I've just been, like burying for the last 20 years. And they're all around. Oh, no, I got to deal with that. So that was the next few days of getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And then eventually I got to this state where I didn't react to anything, whether it be the thought swarm or all of the things that I've gone through in life. And God, it was fun. It was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And one of the most rewarding things. When I came back, I felt so not only just relaxed, but also just clarity in life. And it's so easy now to kind of establish a proper mindfulness practice. And this particular school is secular. It doesn't have a metaphysical component. There's no energy chakras or anything like that. It's just very simply, following the breath and being in the moment, and just accepting what you see as you see it, and letting things go, and having a beginner's mind and not judging things as they come, and non-striving. It's really just creating a mindful attitude. And already it's had a profound impact. Like that article I wrote, I spent 4 hours writing it. I did it the day I came home, and I started at 10 p.m. and I finished at 2 a.m. I was in flow the entire time, just all the way through the editing, everything. Didn't even notice the clock. Just went all the way through and got it done, and I didn't get distracted once. And a lot of mindful listening as well. When people talk, I kind of slow down a little bit and really listen to them and dig it in. I say, wow, this is incredible stuff. So highly recommend it to everybody. It doesn't have to be SMC or, Kabat-Zinn school of thought. It can be Zen or whatever. But just this idea of taking a week for yourself to slow down and go into deep introspection and really just be in the moment. And you get so many gifts from it. when I was at SMC, they had all these beautiful sunrises and sunsets, and just see that sunset and actually take it all in and just totally be aware of that moment. Or the way that the wind blows. Sometimes you just don't notice that there's different sounds from the waving of the grass to the leaves. And all of these things have these textures and these nuances, and they all kind of blend together when you're distracted. But when you're really in the moment and you're taking the time to pay attention, they're all there like a vibrant colors, and you can feel and sense them. And it just adds so much richness to life when you can see those things.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I definitely got a lot out of reading your blog post. So, highly recommend viewers go check it out. I think you can just easily Google it. It's aren't that many Charles Hoskinson's blogging about going to Shambhala, center and meditating. So Google will find it for you. But it really is, I think, something that people should really think about and explore, right? One of the things that's fascinating is, in Eastern philosophy, there's this kind of idea of the ego, right? And the ego is sort of this idea of a self that's separate and an idea of a self that requires sort of protection, right? So it's something that you encounter in the process of meditation, right? And you encounter it sort of in the form of thoughts and in the form of experience. So I'd love to kind of have your thoughts about how you had these encounters, and how did this play out for you?
Well, I think one of the first things that you recognize is that there's a big deficit of self-love and self-compassion. So in the Western world, we're kind of taught two lies that are so destructive and pervasive. So first is this idea that you're allowed to be a harsh self-critic, and that's okay. So you can't be critical of others. You can't tear people down and yell at people. That's not a social thing.
Isn't that crypto Twitter though?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's such a terrible place. But you're okay to be crypto Twitter to yourself, apparently. Like the David Goggins, you're allowed to hate yourself. But then if you really think about that is one of the most toxic relationships you can have in life. Would you be married to somebody that when you get 98% of the test, their first words out of their mouth are, well, why didn't you get 100%? You're stupid. Or if you go and play this amazing symphony, you're first chair violinist or concert pianist, and everybody's plotting an encore, and they say, well, about 32 minutes in, you hit the wrong note. It's terrible performance. Would you be married to a person like that? You'd be like, this is a toxic relationship. But that's your self-critic. You carry it in. There's a difference between striving to do better and diminishing what you've achieved. And you really see the distance between those two things when you're deeply reflecting, and it helps you tremendously. The other side of it is that people think self-love is narcissism. It's actually the opposite of narcissism. Narcissism is the absence of self-love in the things we do, first internally and then externally, to compensate for the fact that we actually hate ourselves. So if you don't like yourself, you create all these fictions and delusions to help, bolster up the ego, and then they start manifesting in unhealthy ways. And eventually with narcissistic people, they actually enter relationships and so forth. If you meet a person that truly does have compassion and love themselves and think they're okay in life, that's probably the least narcissistic person, most genuine person you've ever met in your life. But in the Western world, we conflate self-love with narcissism. And some definitions, it even comes there. So I'd say that's kind of the first real realization that you have. And then there's this idea of non-striving. So there's but if you don't strive for things, then you can't accomplish anything. And really, that's another lie that people tell. So we are obsessed with the future in Western society. Eastern culture kind of gets a different viewpoint. In Western society, we say, okay, it's okay to live in misery and not enjoy the things that you do and just view everything as a sacrifice in the present to strive for some future that once you get there, you'll be happy. Once I get rich, I'll be happy. Once I get the PhD, I'll be happy. Once I marry the hot girl, I'll be happy. Once I get the Lamborghini, I'll be happy. So it's okay to destroy my health. It's okay to have bad relationships with people. It's okay to do X and just go through hell and hate every moment of it, because once I get there, it'll all be worth it. And then you get there and it's not. There's a hedonic amnesia, And you're like, wait, I thought this was going to be great. I thought being a crypto what was like awesome. And now it's not there. So it must mean all the time I spent sacrificing and struggling was meaningless, was not a good trade. So the point of mindfulness is finding joy in the moment, regardless of what the moment is. And there's a saying they have, translates to pain is not punishment and pleasure is not reward. So, just because something hurts or something feels good, it doesn't mean it's good or bad. And once you start really getting into that mindset and you have the capacity to view the world that way, then you can accomplish anything. Because anything you truly desire, the steps you have to take to get there are not painful. They're part of an experience. And you can go through that experience and find joy in all of those moments, regardless if they're tough or painful or not. Just like the meditation retreat, it was not physically fun. I'm not in really good shape. And that's another thing I learned is how out of touch with my body I'd become. But, I had pain in places I didn't even know I had. There's things I didn't even know. I thought it was just bone there. I didn't realize I could have a pain like that. Holy shit. Didn't realize I could cramp up. And so it's crazy how much pain I was in and how exhausted I was sometimes. But yeah, I look back at it, I don't feel like, oh God, I'd never do that again. That's so miserable. That was so terrible. No, I look back at it as I said, one of the best things I've ever done. It was incredibly hard, and you have to wait for some time to accumulate before you do it again because you want to come into it with new experiences and wisdom and so forth. But I'd recommend it to anybody, no matter how hard it was, because of how valuable it is. And just that lesson of connecting to your body. When you do the yoga, because we were doing yoga in addition to the walking meditation, in addition to the sitting meditation, and you start realizing that it's almost like you're an alien pilot and the controls aren't working so well. The little creature isn't able to navigate, and you start saying, wow, how did I let it come to this where I'm so out of touch with myself and so forth. Now, in terms of the ego, that's interesting. There's a lot of Jungian psychology you can go back to or these other things. But I think just that baseline beginner's mind of not making broad prognostications about the nature of who we are, but rather just embracing the idea of experience. You sit down, you close your eyes, you're on the pillow, and whatever you experience in that moment is radically going to be different than 15 minutes ago or an hour ago or 2 hours ago. And that's surprising to a lot of beginning meditators. They think it's like a skill, like playing the piano or football or chess, that it's linear, that the more of it you do, the better you become. And therefore, the past experiences should tell you and give you expectations for the present and future experiences. But the true beginner's mind, you can be a Zen monk, 40 years of experience, and see something new and exciting and interesting and different and taste something different the minute that you're there. And that carries into all things, not just when you close your eyes and you sit on the cushion, but while you're eating, while you're walking, while you're looking at art, while you're thinking, all of these things. There's mindfulness that flows into all of that. And that was another thing that I intellectually had read before. I read a lot of Zen books and these things. And I was like, I even have some on the desk, or actually on the couch right over there. So I was some books, but experientially understanding that, connecting to it, it was amazing. And it was very transformative from that perspective.
I'm very excited about that. To me, I have this idea of, what I characterize as perfect moments, right? Because one of the things that's so fascinating about sort of the Zen tradition or Buddhist tradition is that there's this sort of inherent idea of impermanence, right? So, it really means that, the quest for sort of eternal enduring anything, is kind of largely, beside the point, right? So in a sense, you're just kind of in a state of unfolding, right? So that things are happening in your sort of processing raw experience, right? In a sense, the thing that's so intriguing about it is, in a way, like one of the descriptions people have for sanity is this kind of concept of the person came to their senses, right? It's like, oh, that person came to their senses. And it's like, yes, that's kind of what happens, right? Is that, you've arrived in the present moment and you're you're kind of in this ocean of sensory experience, this ocean of direct experience, right? And in a way, there's nothing really to cling to, right? That
Right.
if you sort of try to sort of frame the experience, and all of a sudden it shifts again, and so in a sense, it's sort of this ocean, but at the same time, the thing that's so interesting is this kind of idea of like a perfect moment, right? If you want to kind of spiritualize it, it's almost like the idea of grace, right? But in a sense, like there's this idea of this momentary kind of connectedness that I think can arise, right? And but the thing that I think is so interesting about this idea of a perfect moment is that like that's something that arises and then it falls away.
And what's so crazy is mindfulness teaches you this concept of you shouldn't be attached to the euphoria of the moment, nor should you be sad that the moment is gone.
Yeah.
It just gives you the capacity to truly enjoy the moment for what it is. And that's magical. The Buddhists have this incredible thing called, have you ever heard of a sand mandala?
Oh yes, that's a big Tibetan thing.
Yeah, so for the viewers' benefit, these monks will sit down, often for days to weeks, meticulously making these beautiful, beautiful sand sculptures, and bead by bead, rock by rock of sand. And they have colored sand, so some red sand and some blue sand and whatever. And you'll just see this incredible pattern that comes out of it. And as soon as they finish it, they destroy it. And it's just such a mind fuck because it's beautiful, and they spent so much effort. Day after day, they'll get up very early in the morning. They'll go all day long sitting. I was complaining about cross-legged for an hour or two at a time, and these guys are sitting like 14 hours, just right there. One grain of sand after another grain of sand in a meditative state, super disciplined, building this beautiful collective thing, and then just destroy it right afterwards. Because the point is to show you the impermanence of things and not to get attached and love things. And that's truly a magical concept, and it's something in the Western world, again, that we have a little bit of difficulty with. Now, one thing I will put a caveat here, all this mindfulness stuff actually is not wisdom. And that's another common misconception that people have. The capacity for awareness is the cultivation upon which the seeds of wisdom can be planted. But you still have to decide what seeds you're going to plant in that garden, what you're going to grow. So you can take a Christian tradition or an Islamic tradition or a Buddhist tradition or whatever have you, a secular tradition, a very atheist view, like a very rationalist view, like Steven Pinker, and you can plant those seeds in the garden. And what the awareness does is it gives you the ability to see things for what they are. And also it allows you to divorce the emotionality of things. Like, do you believe this because you're fearful of a future or a trauma of the past, or do you believe this because this is what the plant has grown to, where the deductions have come, where the framework, the metaphysical or epistemological framework has grown to? And that's another thing that people seem to conflate with is, if I go out from the mountaintops and meditate, I'm just going to get like these divine revelations that will somehow like guide me in life. And then they have a huge disappointment, which, by the way, you should never enter meditation with expectations. That's the devil. You should, like they asked at the beginning, it was a trick question, and I didn't get it at the beginning, and I caught it at the end. They're like, okay, well, what are your expectations? Like, imagine you drop a rock into a well, and it's sinking and sinking and sinking and sinking. Where does your rock land? That's your ultimate expectation of what you're going to get out of this meditation retreat. And then at the end, I was like, wait a minute. The goal ought to be just to follow the rock as it goes down and not have any expectations about where the rock lands and experience what the rock experiences as it goes down the well. That's different. So there's that's the thing that people have to really keep in mind. And so to manage the effectiveness of it, you really should also enter in with some framework of thought of where you're going to derive your wisdom from, whether it comes from a divine source or from a rationalist source or some other process. And then once you've redone that soil, plant that in there and see how it grows. And for some people, it strengthens their faith, and for other people, it changes their faith. But just to follow that thread, you can go to Amazon and you can enter literally probably for any tradition, mindfulness for X, mindfulness for Christianity, mindfulness for Muslims, mindfulness, and you'll actually find a book probably written about that, which shows you that that's the wisdom tradition that kind of sits on top of the soil that you make.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the thing that's great about, sort of these ideas, a friend of mine said something really interesting to me the other day. He said that experience doesn't matter, and the reason why he said that, this is quite an interesting and controversial statement, but his idea was that different people will come away from an experience with radically different lessons, right? And it was such an interesting insight, right? Because a person could have a lesson that they learned, so for example, let's say someone has a great success at the first thing they try to do. Right.
Right.
So it's possible that the lesson that they learn from that is that, they're a genius and everything that they touch kind of turns to gold. Right. And,
We call that the cryptocurrency space, by the way.
That never happens in crypto. Right. So, and obviously that might not be reflective of like a perfect lesson, and that lesson may be unwound by the next trade that you may decide to make. Right. So, but the thing that I think is fascinating about what you're describing is by kind of arriving at your senses, right, then you really kind of not kind of stuck in a narrative that is sort of a historical narrative about yourself, or so you're really just there. You're just there looking at what is, and that gives you perhaps a better chance of pulling out wisdom out of a set of circumstances, right? So things will occur, right? And instead of kind of pretending that it's part of some grand story, like you might actually just notice the moment when something new happened, right? That you like the idea of, oh, I have never seen this before, right? Because the idea of like, oh, I've seen it, the idea over time, sometimes people get jaded with this idea that they've seen everything before, right? And so at that point, they've actually stopped paying attention to anything, right? Because the possibility that they could have never seen this moment before, right? Like every single moment arrives and they've never seen it before, right? So, but
Right.
if you come at that moment with like, oh, well, this again, right? Oh, I'm so sick of this happening over and over, and it's like, none of this has ever happened to you ever before. So like, if you find yourself sick of things happening over and over, like, maybe it's time to take a look at it with a pair of fresh eyes.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, look no further than the tale of two movies, Star Wars versus Interstellar. The problem with Star Wars is it's impossible to have the audience not have an expectation, negative or positive, when they enter in. Like after The Last Jedi, I was so traumatized by Star Wars. It was like South Park with Indiana Jones 4, where he gets raped by George Lucas, and all the kids are crying and everything, like they're recovering victims. It was a great episode. But after Last Jedi, not only was it so bad, I actually lost my love for Star Wars. I used to love Star Wars, and I got really excited about the movies. And even if they're a bad one, like Phantom Menace, they'll make it up. After that, like, Rise of Skywalker, whatever. Okay. I didn't even watch it for like 2 months after it came out. I didn't care. I was the guy who, like, day one, I'd be there. So when The Mandalorian came out, I didn't pay any attention for all of season one. Everybody said, you got to watch The Mandalorian. I said, why? It's garbage. Everything in Star Wars is dead. It's like, it's not for me. And I said, all right, I'll give it a fair shot. So I entered The Mandalorian with no expectations at all. I just, all right, whatever. And I kind of got drawn in, and I said, wow, this is like the Star Wars that I came to know and love, and it paid off. So that was great. Now, compare that with Interstellar. That was a movie we all knew nothing about because it was an original film, and it was like the trailers didn't really tell you very much. And then he comes in, he's like, this is just good old-fashioned space journey, like 2001 Space Odyssey. And they're just doing stuff, and like planet with black hole and giant waves and fucking rectangular robot thing. And Matt Damon just shows up and fucking clouds of methane. And, all right. Yeah. Stuff is happening. And you don't have expectations. You're just sitting, watching and experiencing the sound and the cinematography and the completely alien worlds, and appreciating the fact that they tried to be somewhat scientifically accurate. And you have no idea what the next scene is going to be. And I found that I enjoyed Interstellar far more than any of the last Star Wars films that had come out. And so I think you're definitely onto something about expectations. Now, in terms of entrepreneurship, if you get 1,000x in a year, you're not smart. You're lucky. And the problem is that our industry is filled with lots of leaders and investors who feel that they're smart, not understanding that they got very lucky. profoundly lucky.
Yeah.
They're like Beverly Hillbillies. They shot something in the backyard and then suddenly oil's coming out. I'm sorry, it wasn't your skill that made you rich. You found oil in your backyard. Okay, it's a completely different scenario, and the real skill comes into consistency, the ability to survive the bear market, come back, survive the bear market, come back, and honoring the commitments you make and demonstrating, doing the things you say. So people say, well, but what makes Bitcoin great? It was worthless when I got into the space. No one cared about it. There were StarCraft tournaments where like the fifth prize was 25 Bitcoin, and I was like, okay, that's Bitcoin. Like, who cares? And yet it survived, and it built a following, and it kept going, and it decentralized more. The founder left. It survived. It keep going. So now Bitcoin has become something anti-fragile, and it's become something eternal to a point that nation states have adopted it as sovereign currency. Yeah. That is not luck. That is persistence, skill, dedication, and cultivation. It would say what you will. It's the least advanced of all the cryptocurrencies because it was the first, and it updates very slowly. And we all compete because we need features that Bitcoin doesn't have. But yet still, as an ecosystem, it is still the largest and most decentralized and still the most vibrant. And that is the true wisdom of our industry, is to separate the luck from the skill and to separate the philosophy from the ephemeral current and really understand where value comes from and really understand what's going to be around in 5 years or 10 years and 15 years. And sometimes it's quite disheartening because you put your heart and your soul into this and you put in a lot of good work, and then people just say things that are just so out there, so just bizarre. And then you're just like, did you pay attention to anything that we've said, anything we've done, anything we've accomplished? Or by what metric do you assess credibility or truth or what? Well, it's price, or it's this. So you're a genius if the price is high. You're stupid if the price is low. Okay. But are we going to be here in 5 years or 10 years? Some of us who've been around for a long time, we're both starting to get a little old, Miko. Remember CoinMarketCap, every year the top 10 change. I remember when PureCoin and Namecoin were in the top 10 on CoinMarketCap. That was a long time ago, but I remember it. They change every year. And so what's hot now will probably not be hot later. So what keeps you consistent is that dogged determination to the mission and vision and to the things that make you special. Bitcoin never betrayed its principles, not once. We disagree with the way it's constructed. Obviously I'm on the proof of stake side and there's proof of work. Fine. But yet it doesn't diminish in any way, shape, or form that they're philosophically pure about what they've done. And that's why they're here. And that's why they have adherence. And that's why they have power. And that's why they have growth, because there's philosophical purity there. And there is real use and utility within that philosophy. And there are people willing to sacrifice to keep that use and utility going, regardless of whether Bitcoin was $1 or $10,000. Doesn't matter. They've been around. They keep going. They keep pushing.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like, what you're saying is very deep. And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is sort of time preference and long time preference, right? And it's so interesting to think about this idea because, there are different sort of wave frequencies, right? And, this all sounds very like abstract, but what I'm really talking about is I'm talking about sort of time preferences, right? So in a sense, like a day trader has a day's time preference, right? And like, someone in like venture capital may have like a 10-year time preference, right? But they're still trying to get in and out of the market, right? They're sort of just different time frequencies of waves, right? But like the thing that's really interesting about something like a Bitcoin that you're describing is that when you look at it as this idea of making and keeping promises, right? The thing that's so intriguing about kind of Bitcoin itself is that like Bitcoin kind of has ascendancy as a function of, really not having betrayed anyone, right? And it's so funny because if you look at Bitcoin as a game, right, then the rules are being adjudicated beautifully by a machine system, right? And the thing that's so amazing is people have played that game badly, but the game has never betrayed anyone, right? The rules of the game are perfectly adjudicated, and and no one can point to a transaction and say that transaction was improperly adjudicated, to me.
And what we're actually seeing is Bitcoin is a pricing mechanism for institutional legitimacy. We live in a world right now where every single institution of governance and credibility is being systematically challenged. The media, now because of COVID, the medical infrastructure. Like I remember the Lancet. It's a beautiful journal. It's been around since like 1823. And in February 2020, they said, we stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have natural origin. Then in December of 2021, they say, to be clear, the lab leak theory was and always remains a perfectly legitimate line of inquiry. I mean, it's like they're saying opposite things, and this is a journal that's supposed to be super credible, MD PhDs, all these other things. And every other institution has been demonstrated to be compromised, from the FBI to this and that, regardless of where your politics fit. So then you have Bitcoin come around, and I'll tell you the moment that I knew Bitcoin was not going to die. It was eternal. It was when Mt. Gox collapsed, and the core developers had millions of dollars of their money in Mt. Gox, and not a single one of them even dared utter the idea of a reversal or rollback or a bailout. They said, well, we're just going to lose all our money. That's okay. It is what it is. That's how Bitcoin works. That's the game. That's the social contract. And then the whole world looked at that, and it was like an anti-pattern. Capitalism works until we got to bail it out.
Amazing.
We keep going. George Bush, his famous quote paraphrase, I had to abandon my free market principles to save them. So 2008, the financial crisis. So we were so used to bailout culture of systems that they violate the label because we need to for reason X. And then suddenly this thing comes around where it doesn't ever lie to you. It might not be convenient to you. It might hurt you. You might be on the losing end of it, but it's a fair game.
Yeah.
And it's transnational, and you don't trust anybody to make it a fair game. Yeah. So the price tag we see on Bitcoin is the price tag of institutional legitimacy. That's the core value prop. And if that's all it does, that has enormous social utility, because it's a mirror to the governments of the world and the institutions of the world, showing them what their trust deficit effectively is. It has no reason to exist if you trust central banks. It has no reason to exist if you trust the media. It has no reason to exist if you trust any of these things. You can get fast digital money and so forth. You had this congressional inquiry recently, and they had AOC and Maxine Waters and all these other Congress people questioning Circle and Coinbase and the rest of the gang. And they said, well, hang on a second here. We already have all these great things with digital money, so why do we need any of this stuff? Because no matter how fast the Fed can make money, how fast you can build a layer 2 system to do something, you cannot replicate honesty, integrity, trust. These are fundamental things.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're talking about stuff in the multi-trillion-dollar valuations now is as much an indication of the failure of the trust of the other systems as it is the strength of the social contract of Bitcoin itself and the cryptocurrency space as a whole.
That's fantastic. I mean, to me, I kind of almost got a chill when you were describing sort of the preservation of immutability, right? Because in a sense, it's sort of like don't hate the game, hate the players, right? It's sort of this complete flip, right? It's basically this, entire mood of, I mean, in a way, like it's this incredible feeling, right? Of where it's sort of like, okay, like we should have played that better, right? Because obviously when you look at the rules of the game, like you're really not supposed to just take your Bitcoins and hand them to random people,
right?
Like that, it's sort of like, okay, should have protected yourself better, should have played it better, right? But like, it's definitely not, it's not hating the game. I mean, that's a monumental milestone.
And by the way, institutions require trust to work, and if you don't have it, then shit really starts falling apart. Like, look at a hospital. Look at how much trust is embedded within that structure. It's so much.
Ideally.
You trust the credentials of everybody there. You trust that it's clean. You trust the processes and operations of it. You trust all the drugs there are not counterfeit or adulterated. You trust the place the hospital is located is safe, because you're very vulnerable when you're at the hospital. You trust that you're going to have the procedures done correctly. The power is not going to go out. There's like, you could spend 8 hours meticulously writing down all of the things you have to trust in order for a hospital to work. And if even a small set of those things become corrupted in some way, a lot of people end up dying. Everybody could be perfect, but what happens when the power goes out and the backup generator dies and you're right in the middle of an open heart surgery? What do you do? So it's like all that stuff. It doesn't matter that your heart surgeon went to Harvard and trained at Johns Hopkins and he's the #1 heart surgeon in the world. If, there's no power and all the machines go down, like, what do you do?
Yeah.
What's the process there? It's very, very hard to keep you alive. It's little stuff like that. And you trust that the freezers are working properly and the drugs are not destroyed. Like, how do we really know the drugs aren't expired that are being injected into you and that there wasn't a contamination or something that occurred? You trust that the pharmacist mixed things correctly. You trust that they didn't mix up your IV bag with the chemotherapy ward and they're giving you chemo drugs and a mega dose of it. You trust that the software developers on the diagnostic equipment didn't fuck up on the programming and your x-rays giving you 10,000 times the radiation that you should because they confused a floating point integer and there was an overflow or something like that. So you're confused. You're trusting so much when you step, but you don't think about it because you say, I trust this institution. And then the problem is that once the trust fades away, it takes a very long time for trust to return to an institution. So once a hospital starts killing some people, 20 years later, they're still talking about it. Oh, yeah, that was the place Bob died at. I hate that place, and so forth. And so inflation is a great example of that. Most people trust the federal government about the consumer price index and the inflation numbers. And so, in 2002, if they say, oh, the CPI is 3% inflation, how many people really challenge? Ron Paul would, these other Austrian economists, but nobody listened to Ron Paul. Now they're saying, oh, inflation is 6%. The vast majority of Americans don't believe it. Even if it's true, which it's not, they still don't believe it. They said they're cooking the books. Because you hear the double speak. You got these guys going up saying, oh, the price of food's not too bad as long as you discount the price of chicken, pork, and beef. Okay. The marriage is great if you discount the infidelity, the second wife living in Kansas, and the theft. I was like, come on, man. It's like you're saying crazy shit, but yet they say it with a straight face, and then the media writes stuff. Like The Economist wrote this tweet came out. It was so crazy I had to tweet about it, where they're like, most economists were surprised by inflation. And I'm just sitting here like, you double the money supply and destroy all the supply chains, and then you're surprised that prices go up. It's like you drank bleach every night for 6 years, and you're surprised that you've now caused irreparable damage to your stomach.
So one thing that I would love to kind of talk about that I think is really interesting is to me, I've been thinking about sort of life, liberty in the pursuit of happiness, right? And in a way, like broadly speaking, like liberty is quite an interesting idea, right? And there's really two models, right? I would say the two models of liberty are basically individual liberty, right? Which is sort of based on like individuals get to do whatever they want, and that kind of goes off into a more libertarian direction, right? But then there's kind of another idea of like, we get to create sets of rules, and we also get to choose which set of rules that we want to comply with, right? So in a sense, this idea of like we create rule sets, and then we consent to which rule set we are beholden to, right? So in a sense, there's this idea of commitment, and this idea of a community, and this idea of like a connection. And so I guess to me, like, really interested to kind of get your perspective on freedom, right? And get your perspective on sort of the idea of freedom, especially in the context of blockchain, right? Because in a sense, when we talk about like agreeing to a set of rules, it goes all the way back to what we were just talking about with Bitcoin, right? Which is the reason so many people have consented to play by those rules is because they can see that the rules are adjudicated fairly, right? So that, in a sense, like obviously you can play that game and lose, but like, but it's not the fault of the rules, right? So in a sense, like people understand they're being treated fairly and they keep coming back, right? I mean, that's
yeah. Let's talk about rules and consent. These things. This is a great question. And it really covers the core of the cryptocurrency space. So I was recently at a rodeo at NFR. It's like the Super Bowl of rodeos, and they held it every year, usually in Las Vegas, although last year they held it in Dallas because of COVID. But, they have a mask mandate in the state of Nevada. And all the casinos are supposed to enforce this mask mandate. Well, cowboys are freedom-loving people, and They don't really give a shit. And so it was funny because you walk through all these halls and you'd see thousands of cowboys walking through, no mask on. And you have this one like casino worker. I feel so bad for him. Like, sir, please put a mask on. Even the cops had given up a try. It's like, there's too many of these guys. They're just going to do what they do. So there's the law, but then there's consent to the law, which is exactly what you're talking about. So the more legitimacy a system has, generally the more consent the system will have.
For sure.
Science has enormous legitimacy, especially natural science, because we tend to understand cause and effect. And we know there's an immutability about that. So, for example, if I put if I say to you, don't open that container over there, and you say, why? Because I said so. Maybe some people say, okay, I'm not going to open that container. But, curiosity got the cat. Most people won't ever. If I put a little symbol, radioactive waste, on the side of the canister, same canister, I just put that, how many people you think are going to open the lid? Especially people who understand what that means. Oh, God, no, I don't want any radiation. You couldn't pay people to touch it because they understand the causal implications and the dangers there. So I didn't have to pass a law. I didn't have to do anything, just that understanding of how things ought to work. So there's a lot of legitimacy in those types of systems. People tend to get that. Yeah. Now, what crypto did is it created an artificial laws of physics for social processes. So why is inflation not going to happen in the money supply? Why is the money not going to be double spent? Why is the record immutable? Well, because here's the game, and you can mathematically measure the level of certainty you have in the statement of why not. And then you can decide whether that level is sufficient for your use case.
Yeah,
so in
proof.
The beginning, Bitcoin was very, very weak because only a few people mined, and I wouldn't trust it with $1 million. But now regularly billions of dollars move around. Nation states use it. The U.S. government can't hack it. China can't ban it. It's got enough social weight behind that you can quantify the power of a system like that. We as a human race have never had that in social rules. They've always been conventions. So it's actually an interesting third option where we're not asking, okay, what's natural law and what's man's law? We're now asking, well, what can be synthetically made into natural law that actually is consensus of people? And monetary policy is a component, but then you start asking the what-if game. Like, for example, why doesn't voting work this way? They tell me my election is secure, and maybe you believe that. Fine. But have you ever been able, and this is another closely related property, inclusive accountability, have you ever been able to check your vote yourself and see that it was counted correctly? Most democratic systems, the answer is no. And they even say, oh, well, you shouldn't be able to do that because you could sell your vote. I can sell a mail-in ballot to somebody to fill in. You'll let me do that. So you've already lost that. So inclusive accountability is a property Bitcoin has. If I send something to you, you don't take my word for it. If you have a full node, you can check and verify yourself that is there. And you know what level of certainty and security that holds. Well, equivalently, you could create a voting system this way and preserve privacy. You could create a supply chain system this way. You could create a credential system this way. You could create an audit system for the books of a company this way. That really is something that's entirely new. And that's really the core of the revolution of cryptocurrency. So then there's the question of, okay, what does this now mean for governance in the 21st century? Libertarianism and collectivism, they have baked within them philosophies that aren't quite right. So in the case of libertarianism, it has baked in this idea of a rational person. And the issue is we aren't. Freakonomics or all these books, they really show you how often human beings are irrational. Yet you have to have rational people to have a well-ordered, freedom-loving society, or else what happens is the places where we're irrational end up causing a lot of harm and problems, and then you need to regulate to control those behaviors.
Yeah.
And so then on the collectivism, you're assuming there's consent behind the sacrifices you're asking of society. And there's transparency of the goalpost. There's no greater example of that than COVID. So in COVID, they keep moving the goalposts. First, it was 2 weeks to slow the spread. Now we're papers, please. And we keep asking, okay, at what point does life return to pre-COVID days? Is it zero COVID cases? Is it 100% vaccination? Because it wasn't that 12 months ago. It was, let's get to a 70% vaccination rate, and then everybody's fine, and we'll all get back to work. But now, oh my God, well, there's a new variant, so it's all back to what it was. And it's going to end up like TSA and the post 9/11 temporary security measures. Oh, well, you only have to take off your shoes and go through the body scanner for a little bit longer. Eventually, we'll be out of it. Now it's a permanent institution. 20 years later, we're used to this. It's never gone back. We traded enormous amounts of civil liberties. We're being spied on by our government, as we've shown time and again. And we're told, well, it's to win this war that 20 years later has not ended. And everybody that we wanted to kill 20 years ago is killed. But we're still fighting it. We still accept 16 intelligence agencies and all these things. So collectivism only works when there's consent on the social contract, a universal understanding of the sacrifices we've agreed to make, and clear goalposts of things. Then you can ask for sacrifice. And yes, you will have a minority that occasionally doesn't agree with the sacrifice. And yes, you sometimes have to overrule the will of that minority for the greater progress of society. So it's the entire concept of eminent domain.
Yeah. So you're effectively asserting that there's limits of scale on both of these.
Yes, exactly. And the problem is that the institutions that we trust to regulate those things have historically been flawed to the extent that they get politicized, co-opted, corrupted, and then they lose legitimacy, and thus both sides get angry. The libertarian side says these institutions are destroying my personal identity as a person. You're asking me to give up my right of assembly, my freedom of religion, my body. You're telling me I have to do something with my body. That's a big one, and that's morally wrong because this institution is lying to me. I don't trust. And then on the collectivist side, they have these big problems that they're supposed to solve, and because they can't get cooperation from people, they end up having to use force to try to solve those problems. And the more they do it, the more they delegitimize themselves. You look no further than climate change or environmentalist policy. It doesn't matter where you sit on that issue. We do have a problem where the way we do industry today is very damaging to the world. Look no further than going to India or other places and going to the e-waste dumps that they have there. And it's one of the just most tear-jerking things you can see because you have these young kids, some as early 8 years old, 9 years old, going out there with arsenic or mercury and other chemicals, trying to extract gold and silver from miles and miles of iPhones and Galaxy phones and old computers, getting poisoned from this stuff just so they can make a few dollars to sell. And even if they don't do that, just rain hits it and it leaches into the water and it poisons entire villages. Or the lithium mines in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Or all kinds of these humanitarian crises that we have for our lifestyle. So we'd say we'd like to clean that, but that's a collective action problem. And just because you can clean up one country, let's say Germany really does a great job, what if their neighbor doesn't do a good job? You know, all the nuclear power plants in France are pretty well run. But then Chernobyl happens, and all that radiation comes right out over Europe, and it screws all of them. So one bad seed destroys the collective action problem. So collectivism fails there, and you need institutional legitimacy in order to rebalance that and get the sacrifices needed to achieve those projects. So both of them stem from the same place, but institutions always get corrupted and die because the virtuous people who start them die, and their successors are not virtuous.
Yeah, they're bound by tradition, right? And
yes. So we have this third thing, this synthetic social laws of physics that crypto's brought, and we're now experimenting with, well, how do we take that and install that into governance to preserve your rights, and that's the libertarian side, and also to allow collective sacrifice to occur. That's the collectivist side. So you look at Cardano, for example. We have obviously rights, it's like a cryptocurrency. There's immutability and a fixed monetary supply and all the things that people love from Bitcoin. But then instead of giving 100% of the block rewards to the miners, a small percentage goes to a treasury system, which is collectively controlled by all the ADA holders. And they get to vote on proposals that are submitted, and anybody can submit a proposal. So that's the collectivism. And the idea is that creates a treasury for the growth and development and bootstrapping of the system. So you have both sides. And how do you know the sides are credible? Because the institution that regulates that is not a foundation. It's not Charles Hoskinson. It's a blockchain. You know what the numbers are. You know what the percentages are. You know what your rights are when you hold ADA. You know what level of influence and power you have and who wins and who's not. And you can follow every single transaction since it launched in 2017. There are no mysteries here. It's completely open out for everybody. Now, is it effective? That's the open question. You know, what is the most effective thing? You know, is it a libertarian anarchist utopia? Is it a collectivist Politburo China? Or is it this new crypto thing that's in the middle that has all these hybrid properties? This third option. And effectiveness is measured in, do you feel your rights are protected? Effectiveness is measured in, do you feel you're being lied to or you're being treated honestly and equitably? Effectiveness in terms of, can you solve collective problems like environmental problems or existential problems and so forth? Like, how do we regulate artificial general intelligence? How do we regulate gain-of-function research? How do we regulate synthetic biology? I'll give you one quick example. I know I've been ranting, so I'll turn it back, but this one I love. So we're partnered working with a company called Colossal, and Colossal is bringing back the woolly mammoth. It's a really ambitious project, and they'll have it by 2027. Hopefully my ranch will be the place they bring it back. I got a ranch up in Wyoming. And Ben Lamb, George, these other guys are just brilliant people. But the devil is in the details there, because those capabilities to literally resurrect the dead, that's a very powerful capability. And at some point, we have to have a social question of, should those capabilities be strictly in the hands of private industry? And under what circumstances should they not? And the problem is, if we just turn it over to the government, this is the very same government that says, oh, we don't fund gain-of-function research, and then we find out that they are. It's the very same government that lies to us on every day. The very same government that, we're going to win in Afghanistan. They spend 20 years and they pull out. Like Henry Kissinger used to say, being the enemy of the United States is dangerous, but it's always fatal to be our friend. And so, so this is the problem when you think about these things. And so I don't really feel comfortable with them having the power to resurrect the dead, to bring creatures back. But I don't feel very comfortable. It's the same problem with social media. Like, who do you give Twitter to? It's right now in the hands of a private company. If you give it to the government, it's like whatever political power is in control. The other political power is hate speech. But our political power is, lawful speech. But what happens if you have a third option? Protocols governing these things. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah. So, one of the things that's been amazing here, and we did bounce up on the top of the hour, is that, to me, I would love to have a part 2. Like, this has just been a very in-depth and fascinating exploration. I'd love to have a part 2, kind of dive into, Cardano land and, get a little more into the nitty gritty. But to me, this has been spectacular. And, I think, unlike the Star Wars tetralogy, we could maybe just do a Empire Strikes Back one.
Well, we subverted expectations. People walked into this seeing Charles Hoskinson thinking the entire time we're talking about Cardano, third generation cryptocurrency, scalability, interoperability, sustainability, extended UTXO model, formal methods, peer review, all the talking points, right? And we had to spend the whole time talking about meditation and resurrecting woolly mammoths and social contracts and, libertarianism and so forth. And it made a better conversation that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
You see, so that the end is the beginning and the beginning is the end.
Much better. Well, good. I hope we can have you back real soon because, this is definitely juicy stuff.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Miko. This was a lot of fun.
Terrific. Thanks so much.
Mikobits.